Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the witnesses. You've all provided I think I could ask 1,000 questions, but I'll try to be focused. You brought up some really good points, and I would say for just my own experiences in the state of Washington when we had a horrific slide that killed 40 people called the OSO, basically cut our community in response in half. Literally, did we not have broadband communication, but the ability to get to the community, the slide isolated everybody. So literally, you had to drive around 3 hours to just communicate with the individual. So it made the response and the recovery so challenging. And we've had other natural disasters in our state that just bring up this entire communication element of the response. So Ms. Ditto, you mentioned that, and Mr. Yardley, you mentioned it, and Mr. Galloway, you mentioned it too. What do we need to do on the communication side to make sure that the work on the restart is coordinated as well? Because I think this is something, I know that movie Black Hat, I mean, they literally were, wait a minute, not Black Hat, I think it was the Bruce Willis movie, Live, whatever it was called, something, Live Free, Die Hard. But I have watched many of these cyber, but anyway, that was
Stapleton Airport.
That was a fire sale issue. But the point was that they had to go to the ham radio operators. Like, the only people left to communicate were the ham radio operators. So what do we need to do on the communication side here?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I can lead off if that's okay. So first of all, I'll just say, to sort of state the obvious, digital communications is why we have a cyber vulnerability in the first place. But those same digital communications enable a much greater efficiency in our grid that enables variable energy resources and other types of resources that we all care about and want, including battery storage and solar rooftop and some of the things on the edge of the grid. So there are some really positives about communication, but they also create vulnerabilities that we have to manage that risk over time, including doing some of the research that was suggested by Mr. Yardley. But when it comes to this idea of a real black sky event or a Blackstart restoration event, as I mentioned in my testimony, utilities themselves own and operate their own networks in most cases because the traditional communications carriers just aren't willing or able to provide the level of reliability that's needed by utilities in these situations. So if digital communications are lost because of a cyber attack or because of some other situation where your fiber lines are cut or something like that, we still can default in most cases to voice communications over radios, kind of like you're mentioning with the ham radio situation. So we have microwave-based systems that we build and maintain, and we have backup power for them because communication systems require electricity to operate. So we have backup power generation and fuel on site. Some utilities have fuel on site for those backup power generation backup power generators for their communication systems of 6 to 10 days. So, and that's part of a standard that the utility has developed. The fuel on site for those backup generators for communications only. So there are things we're doing already, but some of these policy areas could be addressed.
Well, I wish and I want to hear from Mr. Yardley, but I wish we would address these, because we have real-life examples now. We can go back to our Carlton Complex fire where the Okanagan Valley was basically on fire, and yet, again, the communication lines burned up, and so you couldn't even continue to communicate with individuals. So I think we have some test beds, but I want to hear from Mr. Yardley about your thoughts.
I think there's really two key issues. One is the physical attack on the communications, blocking spectrum, radios not being available, lines being down, et cetera, due to issues from that perspective. But there's also the cyber. What if they're all there, but you can't use them because you can't trust them? They've been attacked themselves. So what do you do then? And further, how do you, it's one thing to support the normal operations, but how do you support the forensic response as well? How do you enable that channel of communication, which may be completely different than traditional operations, and at the same time, your number one priority is to support the normal operations? But you have to weigh that against the ability of forensically communicating to be able to support that operations and enable it in the first place. The second aspect is that with comms under attack themselves, we're good at defending our communications networks, right? The internet is defended every day from attack and subversion, but we see it happen still. So what's to say that an adversary would not do that when they were attacking the grid, that they wouldn't have a multi-pronged attack that attacks just the grid, but also attacks the communications as well? So we have to think about it broader, not just in the aspect of, are comms available, but can we trust those comms? Is the adversary listening? Is the adversary manipulating those communications while we go?
Do we have enough resources here? How do we get a full understanding of the resources needed? I mean, you're coming to us, you know, the home of Mosaic, and producing really what translated the DARPA information into a browser. What else do we need to do to give institutions like you and others the resources?
Well, I think that's a difficult thing, right? There are people that are needed, right? The people that can train, the material that they need to train about and adapting that. But there's also gaining the interest. The aging workforce has been reluctant in some ways to engage in some of the more modern technologies. And you're seeing that adaptation come in with the younger workforce coming to market, but they don't have the background that the existing workforce does on the rest of the systems. And how do you marry those two together where you have people that are trained on the physical aspects of the system, but that are also as well versed on the cyber aspects of the system? And how do you create that hybrid? We've been trying to do that for years at the University of Illinois in collaboration with a lot of other academics, but it's a very difficult problem to solve. And I think testbeds are a way that you can help do that by getting people hands-on experience with these types of stuff so that they can actually say, all right, look, I am doing my physical function that I have, but I have these cyber operations that I have to deal with and understand and address at the same time.
Well, I know I'm way over time, but Madam Chair, I think, to me, we should have a WPPA program for cybersecurity. Like, we should just say, calling all Americans, we will help you get educated in this area if you help us. I think there's a lot of young people in the Northwest, if they heard that call, they would respond to it. I mean, we get cheap hydro, we get cyber, we get the internet, like, but we need to sharpen our call to them, that we need them, and we need them to respond to this. We need thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in this infrastructure call, so I hope we can figure out a way to promote that.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for your